Right away, impossible question. I saw that your all-time favorite book is River God by Wilbur Smith. So what
You
about
really dug deep,
that
didn't
thing?
you?
What a bold move, first of all, for an author to put that in her bio and alienate anyone else she might see at conferences when you said this is for sure my favorite book. But what is it about Wilbur Smith's River God that earns that honor?
Hey, Rob, have you ever, are you familiar with the story at all?
I haven't. I'm hoping you'll give me a great recommendation.
Yeah, well, it's not something I typically read. I mean, if you ask me, like my latest read was Harlan Coben's latest book. I like Lee Childs. I like Dean Koontz. I like Stephen King. I like a lot of suspense thriller, and of course, I read a lot of kids' books because that's part of the job. But there was something about this story that was so gripping, and it really took you back. So the story of River God, it's all about ancient Egypt, and it's told by the story of a eunuch slave and through his point of view and everything happening around him and all these sort of things that are being discovered at the time. And there's a later book that ties together, is set in the present time, that has to do with some of the treasure that gets buried. But most of the book is historically accurate. And I just think for whatever reason, I was so captivated. I guess what a book should do is captivate you, right? It should take you away from where you are and take you someplace else. And there was something about the writing and the story that was so captivating. The characters were so compelling. And the story, even it was, we're thinking ancient Egypt, really? That's what you were interested in? But I'm just telling you, Rob, it was like, so compelling. You were so drawn to the story and the characters, dilemmas and conflicts and the drama and the sweeping drama of it, and it's just this beautifully written story that really, if you ever want to understand what life was like in ancient Egypt and the time of Cleopatra and things like that, this is the story told from these point of views, these people that were living it, and the war and the battles and how the wars were waged, and the type of thinking that went into battle decisions. Today everything is supersonic and computerized, right? But back then you were planning these strategies based on human nature and the physical number of people that you had to put in the field, and the intellect, the actual battles that are sort of being recreated. I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to say because I like fantasy novels, and it's kind of like a fantasy novel, and like a mythology, almost like, it's not Egyptian mythology, but it has a little bit of that feeling. And I have to tell you, any readers, any listeners out there that really want to dive into something meaty and just full on romance and intrigue and political intrigue and just all of the things that you want from a story, you walk away just going mind blown. I was fascinated for years after that by Cleopatra and that story of the time period, of ancient Egypt. So it's one of those books that leaves a mark. Like, not a lot of books, I read a lot of books, right? I couldn't tell you the plot half the time, the character, whatever. You read them, they're kind of like candy, just the authors churn them out every year, right? And they follow a formula. And so I think there was something about this book that was just, didn't follow a formula, and it took me, and it took my heart, someplace. And I think that's, as an author, what you always strive to do, right? To take your reader somewhere into this world and just change their heart, and make them go, wow, I didn't want that to end. I just did not want that to end, and I'm sad, when it ended. So that's a long answer to that question.
Well, that begs another question. First of all, you're a reader after my own heart. I've been watching some of your videos where you're reading to your audience, and you've usually got your shelf behind you that's got the Stephen King and the Dean Koontz right there behind you. Which,
exactly.
when I pan out in front of my shelf, that's what I've got right behind me as well. Because I also love the horror as well as the middle grade fiction. But now that you've tackled Norse mythology and Greek mythology, given that you have this deep passion for Egyptian mythology, are we eventually going to see maybe at least one book, if not a full trilogy?
Okay, so Robert, I gotta be honest with you. Mythology is a tricky field. So when I started writing these books for my son, it was about 9 years ago. And there's another author that writes a lot of mythology, middle grade mythology and stuff. And he really pioneered a lot of the books that were done. And my son was a big fan of his books. And at the time he hadn't written anything in Norse mythology. So I said, I think I'm going to try Norse mythology. I like it. I like Lord of the Rings. It's a natural fit for me. And then of course this author, ended up writing several books in Norse mythology, which is great. We're very different writers. We're very different writing styles. My books always take place in a fantasy realm. Like what I love about writing is to take my characters and move them into a fantasy realm and create this sort of magical world. So I like, maybe I'll start like in the Red Sun, the first book I wrote for my son. It starts here in this world, but it very quickly within 4 chapters goes to a magical realm, and the book takes place in the magical realm. That's the kind of writing I like to do, And so I thought a couple of years ago it'd be really fun to try Greek mythology as an example, and I started to write a series. It's called the Legends of Olympus, and it's a series about a young girl who is a daughter of Zeus, and she has to go back to ancient Olympus and save Olympus from, an ancient prophecy. And the reason I wrote this series is I just had this idea, and this is what happens with authors. We get an idea in our head, right? Like, what if, and I was really taken by the story of Perseus, the actual Greek god Perseus, the one that slays Medusa. And if you're familiar with the story, then you know that Perseus had a prophecy over his head. His father, King Acrisius, had gone to an oracle, and the oracle told him, King Acrisius, your grandson, who has not been born or even conceived yet, is going to rise up one day and kill you. And so King Acrisius, of course, is very worried because they believed everything the oracle said. And he had one daughter, Daenerys, and so he takes her and he locks her up in a basement, because that's the obvious solution. If I'm going to have a grandchild, the grandson, rise up and kill me, then I better make sure I don't have any grandchildren. So he takes his beautiful daughter and he locks her in this basement. That's fair, right? Why not? He's a king. And so she grows up.
She's fine with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the king. This is the way mythology works. People don't actually object to it. That's just the way the story is written. And then, old Zeus, the old goat, right? He sees her, from the heavens. He sees this beautiful maiden locked away in a basement. And as the mythology tells it, in some sort of golden rain of something, Daenerys, she becomes pregnant with Zeus's child. And so Zeus creates this child with the daughter of Acrisius. So now she gives birth to this son, Perseus. King Acrisius finds out, of course, he's horrified. Oh my gosh, this baby is going to grow up one day and kill me. And he wants to destroy this child. But then he's reminded that the child is a son of Zeus, which a powerful god will destroy him if he harms his child. So instead, he does something very kind and loving, as a grandfather would do, whatnot. He takes his daughter and baby Perseus, and he puts him in a wooden box, and he tosses him into the sea. Sure. Perfectly fine, right? What loving father, grandfather wouldn't think that's a perfectly rational solution? We'll just let the sea take care of it. They'll sink and they'll drown, right? And it'll be fine. Problem solved, right? Only problem is they survive. They float across the ocean. They land on a distant island, Seriphos, and a fisherman sort of takes them in, and Perseus and his mother grow up in this small fishing village. And years later, he's at an athletic competition when he's an adult, and he throws a discus, the discus bounces, and it kills King Acrisius by hitting him in the head. Totally accidental, totally unplanned, and that's the fruition of that prophecy. And in the meantime, of course, Perseus goes out and slays Medusa, and he has help from Athena, his half-sister, and all these other gods and whatnot. Okay, so I know, great mythology story, one of the most famed mythology stories in all of Greek mythology. And I thought to myself, well, what if Perseus, he's got this great prophecy. Well, what if he has a twin? Like, what if there's not just one baby? What if there's two? And what if there's two prophecies? And so I couldn't shake it. I mean, I tried 3 years. I wrote the story once, twice, 3 times. I threw it away. I rewrote it. Finally, I figured out what I wanted to write. And I wrote the story of Phoebe, who's Perseus's twin sister. And she had her own prophecy. And to protect, and this prophecy really meant the destruction of Olympus. And so to protect her, the oracle takes her to New York City in modern times, because you can do that if you're gods and you just have magic, whatever, you create this time portal, boom, she's in New York City, and they abandon her there. So she's an orphan, and so the premise of the story, she has to go back to ancient Greece to save, to stop this prophecy, whatever the prophecy is. So I wrote that. Okay, so we're getting back to why not Egyptian mythology. And I wrote this book with full, so much joy, so much fun. And here's the thing about people that read your books. Some people like them, some people don't. And that's just the way it is. And I get that. And it doesn't bother me at all. I totally understand that your book is not going to be for everybody. But by writing a story in Greek mythology, it really seemed to bother a lot of people who had read another story in Greek mythology by a very popular author, and it just really seemed to bother them. Now, kids, we're talking 20-somethings, not kids. Kids that read my book, they love the book. They love it. The teachers love it. I've had thousands of kids read the book, and they love the story. But when it came to social media and to sort of like talking about your book and promoting it and stuff, there was so much pushback from people that would not accept that there could be a second, like your book is just a copy of somebody else's story. Be like, what do you mean? Well, you have the Sphinx in here or something, or you have the Hydra, that's been used. Okay, well, Hydra's been around for thousands of years, right? No one, I like that. Like, it's like saying that, if you write about Thor, you're stealing from Marvel, right? Marvel did not invent, I hate to get, if you guys don't know this or not, Marvel did not invent the Thor, Marvel did not invent Odin or Asgard. Those places were created thousands of years ago. But I found a tremendous pushback from these die-hard fans who said, Greek mythology really belongs to this one author, and you can't write a story there without us really telling you we don't like it. Now, should that stop me? No, it really shouldn't. Does it inspire me to want to go write another series in like Egyptian mythology when this has also already been covered? I don't know. I mean, it's a tough thing. And one of the things that, and of course that, and there's been a lot of books written about those. There's other stories and other people have told stories about them. So I start thinking, well, maybe the answer, Alane, is to not to continue to try to retell stories that other people have told anymore, right? To get away from the mythology, which is sort of set in stone and a lot of people have done, and to go create your own, meaning your own fantasy world, right? And so that's really the direction. This is why I'm not really pursuing, I love Greek mythology. There's so many great monsters. By the way, there's just so many great monsters in Greek mythology. I could write about it all day long. I just wrote the sequel to the first book and it's like 2 books and done. I think I'm happy with that. But I have my ongoing series for the Orkney series, which is I have the middle grade series and the junior middle grade series, and that one's kind of ongoing. I did the trilogy for my son, and then I have the Witches of Orkney, which is for the younger kids, and that's just ongoing. And I love those books, and they're a lot about witches and a little bit of Norse mythology, but not, it's not like the overriding thing. So what I'm looking at as my next project is how can I create my own magic, my own fantasy world, so that no one can say like, well, you just used what somebody else has done, and really make it unique and magical and magic. I love magic. I don't know about you, but I assume you do. I love magic. I love writing about magic and creatures. And so that's what I'm trying to come up with, is a story that will be completely unique and completely magical, but not based on anything we've ever seen before.
Whole new thing. Aren't readers funny and lovable? We love readers, but I have a friend who wrote a young adult novel about a couple of teenagers that fall in love, and one of them has cancer. And of course, there's another famous novel similarly by an author here in Indiana. And it's like, well, yeah, lots of people have cancer. There's room for this story, and multiple times. But for God's sake, when we're talking about Greek mythology, that's literally for God's sake. How many times have we seen and will continue to see these Greek mythology stories? And for God's sake, I think we're going to get 2 different versions of Batman on screen this year alone. I think there's room.
Absolutely. There's no accounting for people's reactions to things, and it's no reason not to write something. I'm only saying it's sort of, as an author, sometimes it takes some of the fun away when you get this pushback from a very large audience that really believes that you've stepped into somebody else's territory. And honestly, I have an infinite imagination. I don't need to write about mythology. My imagination knows no boundaries, so I can make up whatever I want. I don't need to write about mythology. It just was what my son liked. And so I just think from now on, I just want to focus on stories that I've either already started and have, storyline in, or I want to create worlds of my own making where, it's just literally my imagination. And there's so much to be done. Listen, there's so many books we can write, so many stories we can tell, where we don't need to be using, the ancient gods that have already been existed. I can step into other areas, and that's really what I'm focusing on. And I think that's a great opportunity for me to create something really brand new. I'm working on this story it's kind of called the tween worlds, this idea of pocket worlds, in between other worlds, and just this idea that you can just travel to these other worlds that exist in between other worlds, that space in between, and just all kinds of really fun magical characters and things that really don't know any rules, and there's no rules in those, and so you don't have to follow some rule that says, well, this god is the god of lightning and this god is the god of justice and this is the rule. You can just really just let go and do whatever you want. So I'm kind of enjoying it, to be honest. So